In this part, you will see how to log into a remote server using SSH. So there is a very practical command, SSH or utility. You can check the man pages of SSH, but it basically allows you to connect to a remote server. We will see here the most common options. So if I just type SSH, and then, for example, I specify this username on this remote machine. So, for example, this one. So here we want to log in using SSH to this remote machine, right? And we want to use this login, this username on that remote machine, right? So if you don't specify any port, the default port for SSH will be 22. But if you want to specify a different port, so for example, if this server accepts connections on different port, then you can specify it using this -p option. So let me specify this port because this server accepts connections on this port. Okay, so -p, then the port, and this is the username on the remote server. Okay, so it will ask you for a password, and then we are logged in. So any command that I type now here will be sent to the remote server and executed there, and then the result is displayed for me here. Okay. So now if you want to come back to your local machine, you just type exit. Okay, so the connection is closed. So now here any command that I run will be executed on my local machine. So you can specify this username at the server in this way, but if you want, you can also use a space here and use the -L option, right? So this allows you to specify the username and the machine name, the remote machine. Okay, this is exactly the same thing. Okay. It is also possible to execute a single command on the remote server without logging in. So the way to do this is just to do SSH, and then let me use this port because my server accepts connections on that port. I want to connect with this username to this server. And then I can here specify any command that I want to execute on that remote server, right? So here if I just type pwd, it will be executed on my local machine, right? But if you use SSH like this, you can send this command to the remote server and then it will be executed there and the result will be displayed for me here. Okay, so that's the result of this command executed on the remote server. And you can basically run any command there, so it's not just pwd, you can do anything. For example, here I'm just displaying all the file names that have an extension of 3 characters. So it will be executed there and then the result will be displayed for me here. Okay, now let's try to do something else. So let's create a new file. Let's say the file contains, let's call the file welcome.txt, for example, and let's put some text within this file. So let's say hello and welcome to this core or lecture, right? So, okay, on my local machine, I have a file called welcome.txt, right? It's here. And this file contains some text, just hello and welcome to this lecture, right? So this is on my local machine. Now, suppose that we want to send the content of this file to the remote server using SSH and then create a similar file on that remote server. So before doing this, let's just first try out this command. If you remember cat, if I don't give any arguments to cat and just redirect its output to some file, for example, let's just call it, for example, great.txt. So if you do this, great here. So if you do this, cat will accept input from your keyboard, the default or the standard input, and then it redirects whatever you write to this file, right? So if we do this, it is waiting for some input, and the input by default comes from your keyboard, right? That's the standard input. So for example, if I write hello everyone, welcome, this is just a text, whatever, and then if you check the content of this file, you'll see that, yeah, everything which comes from my keyboard has been redirected to this file, right? So cat by default takes the input from the keyboard. That's the standard input, right? But we can actually redirect the standard input to come from a file, right? So let me go ahead and just do the same command, right? This one. But now I want to run it on the remote server, right? So let me do this way as we saw previously. So SSH, and then I specify the port. I log in using this username to this server. And then this means that this command will be executed on the remote server, right? And I want the input to this command, to cat, I want its input to come not from the keyboard, but from a file. And this is the file called welcome.txt that we created. So what we are doing here is just taking this command, right? And we want to run it on the remote server, okay? But I want the input to this cat command to come from this file instead of my keyboard, right? So what happens here is that we redirect the input, the standard input to come from this text, from this file, right? And we execute this on the server. So there will be a file called great.txt created on the remote server, and it will contain the same text as what we have here on our local machine in this file, welcome.txt. Okay, so if I run this, now let's log into the remote server just to see if there is a file that has been created called great.txt. Let's check. So yes, there is a file up. Let's use -l here. There is a file on the remote server called great.txt, and let's check its content. It contains exactly the same thing as what this file on my local machine contains. So yeah, if I exit, now I'm on my local machine, and if I check this welcome.txt, it contains exactly the same text as great.txt, which has been created on the remote server. Yeah, so this is one simple way to send text to a remote server just using SSH. But there are actually more specialized commands to send files to a remote server, for example, SCP. This is another command that allows us to send files securely to a remote server. But if you are not sure that you understand this part here, then you can check the previous videos where we explain how to redirect the standard input. And some examples are given there with the cat command. Let's now see how to use SCP, this command, SCP, in order to transfer a file to the remote server. So let's, for example, say that we want to transfer this file. So this is just a text file that contains some example text. And let's see how to transfer it or to send it to this remote server. So the way to do this is to do SCP, and then we can specify the port with the -P, capital letter P this time. It's not like SSH. And then we specify the port. So in my case, it's this port, right? Depends on your server. And then let's say that we want to send this file, notes.txt. This is the source, and then the destination would be, I use this login to connect to this server. And then on this server, the destination would be the home directory. And then I give any name to this file. Let's say my notes, for example, .txt. Let's just call it like this, my notes.txt. Okay, so that's the destination. That's the destination here. That's the username on that remote server. That's the source, the file that we want to send from our local machine. And that's just the port, right? So if I do this, the file is transferred now. So let's now log into our remote server using SSH and check if this file has been correctly transferred. So if I list the content of my home directory, you see that there is a file called mynotes.txt now on the remote server. And this file contains the content of notes.txt, which was on my local machine, right? So you can always check the man pages of the SCP command if you want to get more informations and some other options that might be useful. Now there are some more commands for file transfer. Let's see, for example, SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol. So man SFTP. So you can check the man pages again to see how it works, but we will see here some simplified examples. So let me first see what files I have on my local machine, my home directory. Okay, so to connect to the remote server using SFTP, you just type SFTP, and then you specify the port with the -P capital letter option, and then same thing, the user on the remote machine at this machine name, and then that's it. You enter the password. Yeah, so if I do get and then the name of this file, python environment.sh, then it will be downloaded to my local machine, right? I can also upload the file from my local machine to the remote server. So for example, let's upload this file, info.txt, to the remote server. And the way to do this is to use put, right? So you can use put when you are connected using SFTP. So put info.txt, right? And this file has been uploaded to the server, right? So if we check now, there is a file, there should be a file called info.txt here, yes, on the remote server. And if I exit and come back to my local machine, there is a file called pyenv.sh that has been downloaded from the remote server. Again, you can check the man pages of SFTP to check in more details how it works and to get more information about it.